In this video I'm going to have a quick look around this electric motor from a Renault Zoe. This is an electric motor and a reduction gearbox from a 22 kilowatt hour Renault Zoe. This motor came out of a Renault Zoe I guess about 6 years ago, and since then it's been in a crate on the workshop floor. I've been tripping over it all this time, so I had intended to find someone to sort this out and repair it, because I have my doubts whether it actually needed replacing. But anyway, back then Renault weren't repairing motors. Well, in fact they still don't, but I got a feeling this was repairable, which I'll show you in a minute. But Renault were just replacing motors, so I asked them if I could keep the original, and I've been tripping over this for the last 5 or 6 years, so this is probably going to go for scrap now because I'm not going to do anything with it. So before it goes, I thought I'd make this video and show you around it. So the motor comes from a 22 kilowatt hour Renault Zoe, the same as this car, and it's a Q motor, so it's the motor made by Continental, which looks like this. So the electric motor actually sits at the very bottom of this motor stack, and then on top you have these other aluminium enclosures, which includes your charging electronics, inverter and all that sort of stuff. So what we're going to look at on the lift in the workshop is just the electric motor, which sits right at the bottom. 90% of the viewers of this channel are not subscribed. I'm sorry to ask, but it would help greatly if you would. Just press the subscribe button. It's free and it shows YouTube you like this sort of vehicle related content. If you want to be notified when new videos are released, please click on the bell button also. Thank you, it really helps more than you would imagine. So this is referred to as the 5AM 450 engine. And this motor, also called the Q210, was fitted in all Zoes from the original ones in 2013 up to mid 2015. And these had 43 kilowatt AC charging. And then in mid 2015 they brought out a new motor, the R240. And the new motor only had 22 kilowatt charging, and they kept the Q motor as an option, and they then called that the rapid charge model. And this Q motor with the 43 kilowatt rapid charging remained an option until 2017, when they brought in the ZE40. So what we're looking at here is the motor that's made by Continental, and these are for Renault only because we've got Renault embossed in the casting there as well. And this is a 65 kilowatt 87 horsepower motor with 220 newton meters of torque. So I'm no expert when it comes to electric motors, so this isn't going to be a technical video at all. We'll just have a look around it before I get rid of it. But Renault described this in the brochure as a synchronous motor with a rotor coil. But what I can tell you is it's incredibly heavy. I guess this probably weighs 60 to 70 kilos, something like that. It's quite a small motor, but I really struggled to lift it. Well, in fact, I couldn't really lift it off the floor properly without damaging myself. So that's why I've got it on the 4-poster lift, so I can raise and lower it to have a good look round, and then hopefully you can just about turn it on this piece of cardboard here. But it is incredibly heavy for such a small lump. So at this end we've got the electrical inputs. On a hybrid or EV, anything that's orange is high voltage. So this is our electrical connections here. It's a 3-phase motor, hence why we've got 4 inputs. We've then got what looks like a 2-pin high voltage connector there. There's a low voltage multi-pin connector there. The motor is water cooled, so we've got our coolant lines here, and then there will be water being circulated around that motor to keep it cool. We've then got another pipe connection here, which we'll look at in a minute, and there's another one there, so I would assume this is just air venting. So obviously this is all the electric motor, and then this is the reduction gearbox at the end. So there'll be a shaft coming out the end of the motor going into the reduction gearbox here, and then this is where the drive shafts here and on the other side there will be going off to the front wheels. So I've spun the motor around so we can see the reduction gearbox here, and this is where the other drive shaft will be going out to the front wheel, and in here will be a differential as well. We can see here this is the oil filler plug, because in the reduction gearbox you have a little bit of oil. On these it's only 0.6 of a litre of oil of MTF 75W80, and for some reason on Renault vehicles they always have plastic drain plugs. It's not unique to the Zoe, because my brother's actually got a Renault Master diesel van as well, and his has the same plastic oil drain plugs on his van as well. And then here we've got an actuator here which will be effectively changing gear. Obviously this is a single speed reduction gearbox, so there's no gears as such, but you've got a park position, a drive and a reverse, and this will be what the cable is attached to, because in the Renault Zoe you've got a traditional gear selector which will have a cable going back to this gearbox. And I can feel on this there are 4 positions. So there's that one, which I'm assuming is park, but I'm not sure. Then we've got one position there which might be reverse, one there which might be neutral, and one there which might be drive, all the other way around. And then from this actuator is this wiring harness, and we've got an 8-pin connection there. And then on the back of the electric motor I've just noticed there's another multi-pin low voltage connector there, and on the reduction gearbox we've also then got this hose, and this is just a rubber cap which sits on it, and I guess that is a breather, I would assume, because there probably isn't a hose connected to that. That cap is meant to be on there, so I assume that is just a breather port for the reduction gearbox. Which is why you've got to be careful taking any type of vehicle through deep water, because they do have breathers and water can get in. It's probably not going to get in just driving through flooded water, but if it's sat in water then it potentially can get into the gearbox. Looking at the top of the motor here, we've got these threaded points here, and that will be where the rest of the motor stack sits on top. So you'll have that charger and inverter units, all those large aluminium enclosures will bolt down on these points to form the motor stack. And then around the motor you've got these other points, and that will be the mounting brackets holding that into the body of the vehicle. What I'm going to do first is remove this plate, and we will see what's under there. And this is just held on with 3 torque screws there and there as well, and I already know what's under here. This is the brush set. So we've got a plate there with a 2-pin electrical connection which goes up there, so that's detecting when the plate isn't in place. And then in here we've got some brushes, and so this is just a plastic cover there that flew on the floor, and then in here we've got some carbon brushes. So I'm no expert here, and if I get any of this wrong let me know in the comments below. So I think these are, or have been, quite a common cause of problems on the Continental motors. A very similar motor is fitted in the Renault Kangoo van, the ZE22 vans, and a lot of those motors, because those vans were older than the Zoe, a lot of those motors had issues, and on some of the ones I saw they often threw up insulation error problems. And in the early days Renault dealers were changing the whole motor, as they did in this case with the Zoe, and then after a year or two they started then changing these brushes. And I know of one case, a customer of mine actually, their van went in at 22,000 miles with motor problems, and Renault changed the brush set here, It cost him, I think, about £700 at the time, and since then hasn't had another problem, and I think he's done double that mileage now. However, previously Renault were changing the whole motors, as I said, so they took a while to learn the issues with these motors, because obviously it's all new technology and the knowledge just wasn't there. So I have my suspicions whether this was another one of those cases, whether this motor got replaced unnecessarily when it was something cheap and easy like this brush pack. So Renault sell a replacement brush pack as a part, and it's £363, but obviously there will be a labour involved in changing this, and I'm not sure whether you can access this panel when the motor is mounted in the vehicle, or whether you've got to take the motor out. If the motor's got to come out, then obviously there would be some considerable labour involved in doing that. So what do these brushes actually do? Well, I'm not really sure, I'm no expert as I said, but for a long time online people were saying these brushes remove static from the motor. I've also seen comments to say that they're to do with the earthing, but a more recent comment I saw was that the brushes power the electromagnets in the motor. And if I shine the torch there, you can see we've got 4 brushes rubbing against the gold rings on the spindle, and you've got 2 this end, and looking at that, the brushes are quite long. So I've read these are meant to last the life of the vehicle, but as I said, I've heard of cases where these have been changed, particularly on the early Renault Kangoos, and they've sorted out the problems. And I've also heard of cases where Renault dealers have just apparently cleaned the brushes. So maybe they've taken the brushes out, cleaned the spindle and cleaned the surface of the brushes, and that's fixed issues as well. But clearly these aren't lasting the life of the vehicle, and on the Q motor we've got 4 brushes, and on the newer R motor it looks like there's only 1 brush. But if you can shed any more light on this as to what these brushes are actually doing and why they need replacing, or when they need replacing, or have you had a motor that has had a brush pack replaced and has that fixed your vehicle? Any other information would be really helpful, so write in the comments below. Also, I can now see that this hose connection here is just a hole here in the aperture at the end of the motor here, so that's either just a breather, maybe just letting out any heat, or maybe this is forced air cooling this, I don't know. Anyway, if you know, you can let me know in the comments. I can't remember how many miles this Zoe had done when this motor was changed, because it was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now. I have a feeling not too many. I think I was sort of seeing motor issues quite often at sort of 20, 25, 30,000 miles. But if I look at the bottom here, there really isn't much dust. So I don't think these carbon brushes have actually worn too much on this example. And there's not that much dust on the inside of the cover. What I also have just seen is what Continental call this is rotor winding resistance, rotor zero angle. As you can see, I've removed this electrical connector. We've got our 2 wires going to the brushes, and there's 2 low voltage wires disappearing into there. I thought they might go to that, but it doesn't look like they are. Yeah, there's no green. So I've now started taking this off. We've got another cover at the top. Again, there's a little 2-pin connector there, so it's identifying when that cover's not in place properly. And all of these are sealed with a rubber seal there, because obviously they have to be waterproof. And then in there are our high voltage connections, and that's why that won't come off, because I've got to undo those terminals there. So with the connector removed, you can now start to see the copper windings down in the motor there on the left. So I had intended to take this motor apart, but I'm having second thoughts now, because I don't know anything about motors, so I'm not really going to be able to tell you much about it. And a motor's a motor, so instead, rather than take it all apart, what I'm going to do is just take the reduction gearbox off. So let's just whip this gearbox casing off. I've put some absorbent pads there because there could well be a little bit of oil still in there, and I'll just now remove all of these 12mm bolts. So I should say M10 bolts, but with a 12mm head. So before I separate the gearbox housing from the motor housing, because I've also got to break this sealant as well, I've got to take the gear actuator off, and I've removed the 2 torque screws, but this looks like it's a shaft going through into the gearbox, and by the looks of it I've got to slide that pin out of the shaft like that, and then that will come off, and then that comes off. So this can't be an actuator as such, it's not a motor, because all the work is being done by this lever and your cable back to your gear selector. So let's just whip this open and see what this does, but I'm assuming it is just sensing the angle of the spindle there and giving you confirmation of what the selected position is back here on the gearbox. So with all the screws removed, yeah, that's all that's in there. So we've got a simple micro switch here, and then this is just moving backwards and forwards like that. So I guess there's a potential for wear on these, but looking at that, there's zero wear on there. It's covered in a grease lubricating it. So that all looks fine. And by removing that, it now gives us access to that last remaining bolt behind. And the sealant here came apart very easily. A few knocks with a hammer and this was separated. I was quite surprised. I thought there would be an awful lot more on there than that. So there we go. That is the single speed reduction gearbox. So this is the shaft here coming from the electric motor. So that's the electric motor turning there. We've then got splines behind there, onto that one, onto this one, onto your main driving gear set here, and then in there, in this bit, is the differential. What can I tell you about the reduction gearbox here? Well, there's the little breather pipe, and it's going through this little shape here. If we look here at the plate, there's the oil fill hole, so the oil level sits at about this, so you can see why it's only 0.6 of a litre, and the drain plug is down there, and it's an 8mm Allen key to remove that, and it's not magnetic either. But there is a magnet in the gearbox. It's down here. It's this cylindrical magnet here, and as you can see there is some swarf on the end of it there. So this is like the magnets on the Hyundai Ioniq gearbox, and I've done a video about that reduction gearbox as well where I took it apart. If you want to see that, I'll put a link to it at the top of the screen and in the video description below. So why are manufacturers putting magnets inside the gearbox that can't be cleaned? So if you had a magnetic drain plug, the swarf would collect on the plug, and when you remove that to change your oil, you would remove the swarf. But when the magnet is there, that swarf can never be removed, that magnet can never be cleaned. So why are manufacturers doing that? I assume it's because the gearbox, well, they say the gearbox is sealed for life and you shouldn't need to change oil. But it just seems a silly design. So if I was doing this job myself, I would probably look at replacing this drain plug with a version with the magnet built in the end. So at least some of the swarf is going to get trapped on that magnet, and then you'll be removing it when you change the oil. But if you're doing that, you wouldn't want to make the drain plug any longer than it already is, because there wasn't much clearance between the edge of the housing here and that differential gear set. This drain plug has a total length of 15.5 millimeters, and the thread length is 12 millimeters, and it's an M16. While the manufacturer claims that these are sealed for life and they don't need an oil change and it's not part of the Renault service schedule, as this has only got 0.6 of a litre of oil in it and the magnet is at the back of the gearbox there where it's not going to be cleaned, then I would highly recommend that the oil is changed about every 50,000 miles or so. It's a cheap job to do, and you can do it yourself if you've got the tools and skills. It's only going to cost you about £10 for the oil. I've got videos on the channel showing you how to do that on other electric vehicles. I don't think I've done one yet on the Zoe, but I'm sure that video will be coming soon. So if it's not on the channel already, there will be one in the next few months or so. So as far as wear and tear goes, you've got these bearings. This one's being trapped because that has fallen. But you've got the bearings on the end. This is the bearing that's going to be turning fast because obviously this is your electric motor, so that's running very fast, and then these are stepped down. So I would assume you're not really going to get much bearing wear on these two, but potentially you could on this one. But these Continental motors, they are prone to whining, and when they get to sort of 60,000 miles plus, I think they do suffer from bearing wear, but I'm not convinced it's reduction gearbox bearings. There must be two bearings either end of the electric motor, and I think it's more motor bearings than the reduction gearbox bearings. But again, I could be wrong, it's just assumptions here. Again, let me know in the comments below. So if I lift this out, there's the differential, and again a bearing there which is sitting on that face there, and it's this differential which wears most in other EVs, I think primarily because of the torque of the motor. So certainly on Nissan Leafs and Nissan ENV 200s, they can lose chunks out of the teeth on the diff here. So if you want to look after your reduction gearbox, just don't floor it away from the lights every time. Just accelerate a little bit more gently, don't use all the torque, and change your oil at about every 50,000 miles or so. So let's look at this. This is the gear selector. Well, it's not selecting gears, of course, it is just selecting park. So this will be locking the transmission up when you select park on your gear selector. And that will be locking into these cutouts on the motor shaft here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only 4 cutouts on the whole shaft there. And by the looks of it, it will be this bit here. This is your park pull, and that will be moving up and locking your transmission when your lever on the other side is selected to the park position. So as there's only 4, there's quite a lot of movement, so that will be coming up from the bottom, so you could be at that point where it's not finding the knockout. So there's quite a lot of movement between each one as there's only 4 knockouts. But anyway, there's not much to this, as you can see, not much inside the gearbox. So all that will be doing is selecting park when your gear lever is in park. The other thing to note here is your reduction gearbox and electric motor are all one component, whereas other manufacturers will have a split here, so the reduction gearbox is a separate part to the electric motor, but that's not the case with this Continental motor. So it makes it a more expensive part. You can't buy the reduction gearbox on its own, it's got to come complete with the motor. I'll put the price of these up on the screen, but I think it's £4,300 including VAT in the UK for one of these. And on this, if you want to take that motor out, then you've got the bolts along the back here. You can take that end off. You can take this bearing off here with a circlip and then slide the motor out from that end. I wish I knew the mileage of this Zoe that this motor and gearbox came from. I didn't record it, and it's been too long ago now, and I can't remember exactly what car this came from. But there's no noticeable wear on these bearings, or there's no swarf in the gearbox, and all the gears and the diff and everything just look in really nice condition. That bearing there maybe isn't as smooth, but there's no notchiness or anything in it. Yeah, it all feels very good. So I think that's about all I can say on this. What I might now do is whip this off, take the end of that motor off and strip this more so I can separate the copper from the aluminium and get ready for when this is scrapped, and maybe I will get a bit more money from it if I separate all the metals. But anyway, if you found this video useful, please do click the thumbs up, that really does help. Do subscribe to the channel and ask any questions in the comments below, or if I've got anything wrong in this video, which is quite likely, also correct me in the comments below. Okie doke, I'll see you on the next one.